Hi, welcome back to True Crime Sages. Um, I wanted to do this video tonight, and I'm going to call this video Chadwell 101. So last night I was awake all night, and I watched a video that a popular YouTuber did in regard to the DelphiHomicides and James Bryan Chadwell. Just a little bit here. So I wanted to, without mentioning any names, address this person and their remarks. And I went through and I made a list of all the things I wanted to address. And I'm just going to go down the list. This is not to dox anybody or, get an angry conversation started. These are just points and opinions and some facts. And anyway, so let's get started. Okay. Someone had recently quoted the police as saying they've ruled out everyone that they've talked to, and that no possible way James Bryan Chadwell could be the Delphi killer. Well, that's not true. In this letter that the police wrote, they said that they wouldn't confirm one way or another who was ruled in or who ruled out, but they did say that they wouldn't, that they can move on from people that they've talked to. Well, first of all, number one, the police don't have to tell you anything. They don't have to tell you anything at all. In order to keep an investigation, to keep it intact, they have to follow the letter of law, and the rules change once someone is named a suspect. Now, they don't even have to tell the families anything in a homicide investigation. They don't have to tell anybody. When they do, it's a courtesy. But let me just say this about Bryan Chadwell, James Bryan Chadwell. He lawyered up. He's not talking. He's not talking to police. They might be trying to get him to talk. There may be negotiations there, but he hasn't talked to police. They've talked to him and they've talked to his attorney, and Chadwell's attorney speaks for him. That's how that works. When someone lawyers up, they plead their Fifth Amendment rights and poof. So yeah, they haven't talked to Chadwell. They may have spoken to his lawyer, and that's it. So since his lawyer does all the talking, you can pretty much, anything he says, which isn't much since he's been arrested. I think the words were no. Yeah, you can pretty much sum up that he hasn't talked to law enforcement about the Delphi homicides. Now, there's a reason he isn't talking. So now that you know that the police can lie to the public or any individual to protect an investigation, let's move on from there. Chadwells DNA. Okay, so someone said, oh, well, many people have thought, oh, well, they must have his DNA right now. He's been in jail since April. Well, that's not true. You have to be convicted of a sex crime in order for them to collect your DNA for it to go into CODIS, unless there is a warrant issued for that person's DNA. And in order for that to happen, there has to be probable cause. Now, it's true. Chadwell was arrested and charged with, attempted murder, kidnapping, and all, molestation, and all these other things with this little 9-year-old girl. But it hadn't gone to trial yet, and we don't know whether or not a warrant was issued for his DNA. I'm pretty certain that if there was, it would have been all over the news by now. So taking that into consideration, now that he's pled guilty to all the charges, and he's in the process of being sentenced, I'm sure they're going to collect his DNA. and run it through the systems, through the varying systems, you know, local, federal, state, local, state, federal, however you want to put it. Now, in regard to the Delphi homicides, police have come out and said that they do have DNA. On an HLN special, Tobe Lesenby said they also have fingerprints. Another retired detective said that this person, these homicides bear at least 3 distinct signatures. Now, what is a signature? A signature is something that a killer will do that is unique to them. So if they're looking at a serial killer, that's how they make their mark. Okay. It could be anything. It could be any number of things. Now, this person or this YouTuber doesn't think that Bridge Guy is a serial killer. And the reasons is because he almost got caught and that there were witnesses, and he thinks this was the guy's first time. You know, that's a common mistake that a lot of people make. There are 2 different types. Well, there are many different types of serial killers, but 2 distinct things, organized versus disorganized. And sometimes there's a combination of both. Serial killers, how should I put this? When you're looking at Brian Chadwell's circumstances, he doesn't have a lot of money. He's not very intelligent. And you can tell by his videos and posts that he has a lower IQ. He's so stupid that he actually puts information on his videos and posts that can be used against him in court. Okay, not the sharpest criminal in the drawer. That doesn't mean he's not an organized serial killer or disorganized serial killer. What that means is he's just not very smart. Now, Gary Ridgway was one of the most prolific serial killers in the nation, and he had a very low IQ. I think his IQ was like 70 or 72, something like that. And yet he eluded police for many years. So a serial killer doesn't have to be intelligent. And when you're talking about Bridge Guy and saying he's not a serial killer, don't make the mistake of thinking that just because someone has a lower IQ or they got rushed or they're disorganized doesn't mean they're not prolific at killing. That's a huge mistake. You don't want to make that mistake. Now, this person also said it seems like cops don't know what the hell they're doing, and there's something sketchy. It seems like something sketchy is going on behind the scenes. First of all, I want to say, what makes you think they'll share anything with you, especially if you're bad-mouthing them? What they told you and what they told the media about Chadwell are 2 very different things. They recently said to the news that James Brian Chadwell is under serious consideration. Now, they didn't name him a suspect to the public, because once you publicly name someone a suspect, the rules of law change. And whereas right now, you know, they have a lot more investigative freedom than they do when someone's named a suspect. And as we all know, Brian Chadwell lawyered up. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And I'm going to suspend that point for a minute. And we talked about the DNA after the conviction of molestation. It goes into the CODIS. Not before unless. So Chadwell in court, he admitted to being a habitual offender. Okay. In his recent pleas, he openly admitted he's a habitual offender. What that means is he's done it as a habit. He's done this before. So when you're looking at what he was just convicted of, by his own admission, he kidnapped this girl and he molested her and he was going to kill her. In fact, he tried to kill her. He pled guilty to attempted murder. He's facing 160 years in court or in jail. So when you're looking at a habitual offender, you have to ask yourself, who has he killed before? Who has he done this to before? He has no record of being ever convicted of a sexual offense. So for them to call him a habitual offender and him to admit that and agree to that, there's a reason for that. First of all, you don't just start out by snatching a kid, taking them and doing all these things that he had done during the commission of the crime with this 9-year-old girl. That takes planning. Now, James Bryan Chadwell can stand in court and say, oh, I was drunk. I did this because I was drunk and the opportunity presented itself and so on and so forth. Okay, I'm not an idiot. He had a mattress and chains in his basement. He had chains and locks for the doors. He had other items there. So he was prepared to do this. The opportunity may have presented itself, but it was premeditated. Make no mistake about that. And again, he admitted to being a habitual offender. That is someone who constantly, almost 90% of their waking hours, fantasizes about, committing these types of crimes. And I want to say, for you to say that they don't know what the hell they're doing, how would you know? It may seem like that to you, but you have no idea what goes on in the back of an investigation. First of all, when these Delphi girls were missing and murdered, okay, Indiana State Police and the FBI have been backing them up since day one. They're running down over 80,000 tips. They've ran countless DNAs, done countless interviews, all these different things. Ran license plates, checked vehicles, road cameras, and anything and everything, shop cameras, interview, just gone from here to here, doing legwork and investigating. They even rented another facility to accommodate them because the investigation is so big. Now you're living in a country with 330 plus million people. And so you're trying to find the proverbial needle in a haystack, especially with this type of serial killer, which is one of the rarest types. Now you figure there's 50 to 100 serial killers running around the US at any given time. That's an estimate, of course, but they know that estimate is a good estimate based on the knowledge that they have in their databases. So in saying that, you're trying to find, one of the most, if not the most rarest type of serial killer in a country of 330 million people. That's a big task. And for someone who has absolutely no law enforcement investigative experience to put down how law enforcement is handling an investigation, I think that's quite obtuse and narrow-minded. Okay, so the police, they have access and are utilizing all of their resources. And there's a lot of various tedious work that goes into that, which sometimes involves waiting for a long time because of legal reasons. I'm not going to go into all that. I think everyone can imagine what those reasons are and what they need to wait on testing, just all kinds of things. Now, there was a question about why the police stopped searching the night the girls went missing. First of all, you're in a vast area in Indiana with a 70-foot tall bridge that's got holes in it. You're surrounded by steep cliffs and water and rocks in danger. You've got hundreds of people out there searching, okay? The police are not able to risk someone else's life. They have to weigh the risk, versus finding the girls. They cannot continue to risk someone else's life or citizens' lives. And that was a tough call for whomever had to make that call. The other thing is you had hundreds of people out there searching, everyone screaming for Abby and Libby, everyone searching for clues. So the police, unfortunately, had to come to two decisions or two determinations. One was that those girls were taken, or two, that they were already deceased. And in saying that, they needed to be able to protect a crime scene if there is one. For people who are unaware of search and rescue and recovery, it's easy to make judgment when you're not in that position. You can sit back and play armchair quarterback and say, well, you would have done something differently if you're the police. Your responsibility is not just to these two girls, but it's to every one of those citizens out there. So you have to weigh the risk versus the reward. Recently in the Summer Wells case, you have people out there searching in 95-degree heat looking for this little child, and they went on for weeks, and people ended up in the hospital. There was dehydration, there were bears in the area that were a threat. There were all these other threats, but those searches stopped when it got dark, except for the heat sensing drones and helicopters going over. But they suspended the searches at night because of the danger factor in that. And that is a consideration. So it's not just always about them not doing something correctly. It is a tough call. And for anybody who's in the position to make that decision, you can't, or I can't, or anyone else can say what made them make that final determination and whether or not it was a mistake. As it turns out, I don't think there's anything that would have changed what had happened to those girls had they stayed out there all night. Move on a little bit. Notes. Okay, so a lot of people are talking about the two different sketches. It's very confusing to the public, and the police came out and said, okay, well, you can see if this person that looks like this sketch, or this person that looks like this sketch, or try to combine the two, it may be a combination of the two. And that angered a lot of people, and it confused a lot of people, and it also made a lot of people question, well, why would they do that? Okay, so if you're an older person, a lot of people will look at an older, as an older person like I am, they'll look at someone as maybe younger, unless they're in the same age range, or a young person might look at somebody as really old. And so the thing about serial killers is they often change their appearance constantly, especially after they've committed a crime. They might shave, they might change their beard, they might decide to just wear a goatee or a mustache or the little patch of hair. If you look at James Bryan Chadwell, and go through, just Google James Bryan Chadwell images, and you look at all of the different looks that this man has, you'll understand what I'm talking about. They often change their appearance. They become sort of chameleons, and that's to hide their identity. So someone also said they don't think it could be James Bryan Chadwell because this was an opportunity. They believe this was his first time, and that he just did this because he was drunk and so on and so forth. And, he stood there like a man and pled guilty. Very typical of a lot of serial killers is that they'll get drunk or hyped up on alcohol and two things: alcohol and speed, some type of speed, crystal meth, cocaine, drunk, whatever. Ted Bundy, he used to get drunk because it allowed his inhibitions to go away, and it boosted his ability. You've heard of liquid courage. Alcohol's called liquid courage. Or alcohol courage, whatever you want to call it, but it boosted his abilities to act out on his fantasies. A lot of serial killers will get drunk. So Chadwell, sorry, but to me, it's an excuse. Of course he's going to say that. What else would he say? Oh, it was an opportunity. Okay, so if Chadwell's standing there and saying, oh, I was just doing this because I was drunk and this was an opportunity, then why did he already have a mattress and chains in those particular positions and other things in the basement prepared to do this? It's because it was premeditated. Chadwell's a stalker. He is a habitual child predator. Yeah. And talking about the getting drunk, you know, you might buy it. I'm not buying it. I know better. Studying hundreds of serial killers over the past 11 years, you know, it becomes very obvious and evident what the excuse is and what really happened. So he said he saw the neighbor girl as an opportunity and is drunk, and so he grabbed her. Let me tell you something about this type of serial predator, especially with children. Children aren't out at night. They're not out in the bars. You know, they're out mostly during the daytime, going to and from school. They're at the park, at the library, at a friend's house, walking home, whatever, but they're snatched during the day. Sometimes it's more usual, you know, early in the morning or after school, or sometime in the evening, maybe walking home or riding their bike. But he says he saw this girl and he saw the opportunity, and so he grabbed her. Just know that he had planned this in advance. You already know that because of what he had in his house. And he even trained his dogs to attack cats. His dog attacked a little girl. I mean, you can't be that naive. Now, this person describes graphically how this child was molested. First, let me tell you this, that really angered me. Okay, you have to be more cognizant and realize that someday this child's going to see your video or hear of your video, or kids at school may see it or hear of it. You need to take that shit down. Okay, that child's medical, physical, and mental condition is nobody's damn business but her own and her family's at this point. And for someone to know that kind of information and put that out there for the entire world to see. Now, if you want to say a child was molested, that's one thing. If you want to say a child was choked, that's one thing. But to go into such graphic details, I think that's very rude and disrespectful. This is just horrible. Take it down. Remove it from your video. Edit it. Do something. But please have some compassion for that child and that family, because eventually, you know how it works. It'll come back around and someone will use that information to hurt that child. So you need to think about stuff before you say and post stuff like that. It's just, I mean, and not only that, you know, if the family decides to sue, which they may, you know, can't say I'd blame them. But anyway, you know that Chadwell was going to, I mean, this was premeditated. This wasn't a drunken spur of the moment thing. This guy admitted in court, in open court, that he was a habitual offender. So his fantasies, and if you know anything about behavioral profiling, his fantasies they include control, rape, and kill, and it's all premeditated, and it's the hamster wheel that plays in his head. Chadwell said, "Oh well, we're talking about the bridge," and so this person was talking about the bridge and how high it is. It's 70 feet high, and you know it's missing ties, and how bridge guy actually walked across that bridge really fast with his hand in his pocket. Now, I don't think his right hand was in his pocket. I think his left hand was hooked on the pocket. Either way, they said, oh, it's scary. Now, for a normal person, that would be scary. You say it can't be Chadwell, but for a welder who does commercial welding and is up walking, you know, I-beams, steel I-beams across the steel I-beam itself to get to the next one, you know, harness or not, these people aren't afraid of heights. You know, Chadwell did this for a living. Him walking up on top of roofs and, you know, high up on top of I-beams doing welding and construction sites. That's what he did for a living. Not only that, he lived under bridges and he stayed out there. So yeah, zero fear of heights. And we're talking about his attitude. Okay. We were talking about his personality just a minute ago and about how he's prepared in advance and how he fantasizes and everything. Chadwell himself, he said, be a lion, not a lamb. In his mind, he believes that, you know, if you're a victim, it's your own damn fault. And he said so in not so many words in one of his videos. So, you know, these kids, the child that he took and, you know, the kids that threw out there, anybody that becomes a victim, he believes it's, you know, their own fault. But if you asked him about himself, oh my God, he cries victim, 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 victim all the time. That screams narcissistic personality disorder. So if you don't know what that is, you know, Dr. Phil and a lot of other people, Grande and so many others on YouTube, you can just look up the video, what is narcissistic personality disorder? And it, you know, with Chadwell, it's like a flashing neon sign. So getting back to another comment that was made about how law enforcement handled this, let me just say this, okay? They did 4 days of scene processing, countless DNA tests, countless interviews. I think it's very insulting to police to call them sketchy, inexperienced, tell them they don't know what they're doing. You have no idea what they're doing behind the scenes. There is a lot more to police work than what you possibly know. They also have to wait on lab results and test results and, you know, all kinds of things. They're processing a scene that was almost the size of 2 football fields that we're aware of. There could have been other evidence out there. Not only that, they have to sift through all of the information that came from the other people, the searchers that were out there, and sift all that out. They actually rented another building to hold interviews, and they've got another place where they house evidence. And, you know, they're waiting reports from this place and that place, all the while tracking down leads and going through 80,000 tips. So for you to say that law enforcement isn't handling this and you don't think they're doing it appropriately and you think they would have caught somebody right by now, you must be Superman. Okay. Yeah. Because only in fantasy is how that works. You know, it's easy for everybody to play armchair quarterback until they're sitting on the other side of it. I have full respect for law enforcement, and I guarantee you they're the ones that take it home at night. Now, again, you said it couldn't be Chadwell because he stood there and he pled guilty. Said, yeah, I deserve to go to prison. I did it. Well, yeah, we all know that's true. Let me just turn you to Israel Keys. He made agreements to plead guilty because he knew they had him. Chadwell knew that they had him. They had video. The child was found in his house. He wasn't going anywhere. Okay. The officer that came back, he came back within a minute. When Chadwell said that the little girl had been at his house, the officer left for a minute, came back. They were going to go in that house one way or another. And thank God they did, because they saved that little girl's life. But let me just say this about Izzy Keys. He didn't admit to anything publicly because he didn't want the public embarrassment for his daughter, and he didn't want the publicity for himself. You know, a lot of serial killers, they want to keep their victims and what they do with their victims private. They'll only give law enforcement what they deem themselves is necessary to get what they want. They're not providing any information. A lot of times, like with who is it? John Wayne Gacy, he kept his victims in his basement. Those were his trophies. Jeffrey Dahmer, he wanted to make a shrine of skulls. But again, until they're caught, Ted Bundy, for example, all of these serial killers, when you look at them, there are always the victims where the police suspect they did it. And, they have extremely similar signatures or identical signatures, but the killer doesn't admit to it. Why is that? Well, because the serial killer, a lot of serial killers don't want the publicity, and they want to keep their personal interactions with their victims because they claim ownership over their victims. Now you think that Chadwell couldn't be bridge guy because he pled not guilty. Let me just say this. I mean, because he pled guilty, I'm sorry. You don't think he's guilty because he pled guilty to this, kidnapping, attempted murder, and molestation of this little girl. That wasn't a death penalty case. He wasn't facing a death penalty. He was facing life in prison. With Abby and Libby and Elizabeth and Lyric, crimes occurring across state lines, guess what? He could be facing a death penalty. If you ask him, what about Delphi? Did you kill those girls? And he says, no. You're actually going to take his word for it? This is a man who premeditated, kidnapped, molested, and attempted to murder a 9-year-old child, and you're just going to take his word for it? Wow. You might want to rethink that. Lots of serial killers say, I didn't do it. And they're lying right to your face. Ted Bundy, prime example. He was locked up out in Utah. This is ridiculous. Oh, they're getting me for this or that, ha ha ha. I didn't do any of this. Yeah, he did it all and then some. A lot of people mistook him as innocent because they thought, oh, he's so good looking, he's so charming, no way could he have done something like this. They get this picture in their mind of who a serial killer is. He could be the guy next door. He could be a kid you went to school with. He could be someone you thought was the nicest guy. And often with child predators, everybody says, oh, he's the nicest guy. No, he's a monster. Okay. And this is someone who, again, is on that hamster wheel of fantasy and has a narcissistic personality. Victim, 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 yet he can do whatever the hell he wants to somebody. Yeah, you might want to rethink your thinking on that. Just because he pled guilty in court to this 9-year-old doesn't mean he's going to admit to Abby and Libby or Elizabeth and Lyric or anyone else, that he may have been involved with. And I'm sure, in fact, I'm certain that law enforcement is trying to figure that out right now. Him admitting to being a habitual offender, yeah, there's some work going on here behind the scenes. Otherwise, why even have him admit it? So there's no death, there was no death penalty for this little 9-year-old girl, but there is for the other cases. That's still, it could be on the docket for him. You don't know. So obviously he's not going to admit to it. Now you said, oh, well, I'm talking about the killer returning to the scene. Okay, how killers often return to the crime scene, and they do a lot of times. Especially with, Gary Ridgway. Ted Bundy said that, the reason that the way they would catch Gary Ridgway, he didn't know it was Gary Ridgway at the time, but Bundy was helping with the investigation, or so, he was giving them clues. He said he'll go back to have sex with his victims, necrophilia. And a lot of times the killer will return to the scene because it's their favorite dump spot. A lot of times they'll come back to, until they can't anymore, and then, they'll move on to the next victim. So in saying that, you're talking about the trail cameras out there, and actually showed pictures of them. Okay, so if you really want this jackass to get caught, and you think that he's watching everything and he's going to return to the scene. Why in the hell would you announce to the world that they put trail cameras out there all over, that they put video cameras out there? Wow. Really? Help the investigation. I mean, there's some things you just don't want to say, but you already put it out there. Not that they didn't know it anyway, but you know, if they're not the sharpest knife in the drawer like Chadwell, it's a possibility. Okay, so maybe he would have returned to the scene, who knows? Maybe he did and you're just not aware of it. And so it made me kind of curious. I went back and I looked at a lot of videos back in the beginning, and I noted Chadwell in 3 different videos right after the girls were murdered, and then again 3 years later. One was at the poker run. He was out there, pictures of him at the poker run. There was also a Channel 13 WTHR news clip and several others. So yeah, Chadwell was paying attention. Now, that doesn't mean just because he was out there that he killed these girls. I believe that he's killed, you know, I believe he did it for other reasons. But I find it awfully curious that he was at a vigil, he was at the poker run, he was on the news. Yeah. Again, you know, putting out there about the trail cams and them, you know, what an investigation is and how they do it in that regard, that's not smart, because serial killers do pay attention to that. If it happens to where it's not Chadwell, I'd be shocked. But if it happens that it's not him and it is someone else, yeah, guess what? They're not going to go out there now. Then you talked about how fast James Bryan Chadwell was with the neighbor girl. And then you talked about the timeline of the Delphi girls and how the killer got in and out of there so quickly. For a lot of serial killers, risky behavior excites them, it thrills them. Okay, so in a serial killer's mind, they get a thrill or a sexual excitement, gratification sometimes out of the risk. So they weigh the risk versus the reward. Yeah, okay, I digress on that one. But let's just say they get a thrill from the risky behavior. And the person that went out there, you may not think he was a serial killer, but if that's the case, you know, think about a serial killer who's looking for a child, who's on the hunt, because that's what predators do when they're looking for children. They're on the hunt, and they're going to go to places where they believe they can find a victim. And the Delphi trails just happen to be that place for a bridge guy. So again, you know, it was a crime scene. It was a vast area. You don't exactly know when the initial attack happened or when it ended. In fact, you know, just because of what the witnesses saw, that doesn't mean that he left. So I'm just going to suspend that point for a second. Let me just say, in serial homicide, on homicides like this one, there are many victims that have zero semen or any evidence of ejaculation or sexual assault. Serial killers will often get overly excited, and ejaculation will happen prior to finishing or in the moments before a rape can even take place. It's not always the case. It's different from, you know, like a brutal rape in a parking lot or something. Rape is a crime of rage with most victims that are raped. But with this type of crime, it involves probably rage, but mostly fantasy. It's an enacted fantasy. So it's two different types of things going on. Anyway, do yourself a favor and the public a favor, and little girl that was taken by Chadwell, please take that information about what occurred down there off of your channel. I'm begging you to do that. I know, you're doing a lot of good in a lot of ways. Not that you need my approval. I don't want to say you've been a hindrance, but that could really hurt that child. And, you don't want that. I'm sure you don't want that. You do have a heart, and you have been out there trying to keep the case in the public and everything. And for that, I applaud you. And you've organized things, and that's all great. It's all well and good. But you wouldn't want somebody to get hurt by that. So in looking at James Bryan Chadwell again, at this point in time, he's my suspect. Now, there are two other people, again, that we're not allowed to discuss for legal reasons. Won't go there, but they're very similar in nature to JBC. Now, when you're discussing the police on your YouTube channel, of course, there's never been a crime like this committed in Delphi. It is a lot more difficult for law enforcement who've never experienced, or, they're not from the big city. They don't see the hard crimes, which is why Sheriff Lesenby and the state police, first of all, it's a homicide, so state police are called in, and their homicide units, not just in support, but in conjunction with the Delphi community and the county police. But immediately the FBI was called in, and they were there the first day. So to say that they're not doing anything behind the scenes, or that you would do things differently, or you have no idea. You might want to reconsider that. These guys go home at night. These women go home at night. These folks that are investigating this, they go home at night and they carry this with them. Trust me, I know from experience that, you can't unsee it. Okay. There are a lot of people out here on YouTube that are sleuthing, and to them, it's something exciting and thrilling. It's like, it's like a murder novel. They're sleuthing. There are a lot of people out in the YouTube universe and in the world that really do care about these families and want to see justice. Thank God, for those people. Thank you, God. There are a lot of people who care. But let me just reiterate this. Murder is an entertainment. These families are desperate for justice. They've suffered horrible, horrible losses. Families of all these victims have suffered horrible losses, and it's not right to, do this kind of thing because you get a thrill out of it or for entertainment. Genuinely, if you want to seek justice, I applaud you for that. And I applaud you for, keeping their name in the media and trying to find out things. But you have to be very, very careful with what you say and what you do. And if you're going to talk shit about the police and the law enforcement that are investigating, what the hell makes you think they'll share anything with you? It's common sense. Because they don't have to. Without a press pass, they don't have to share anything with the family. They don't have to share anything with the public. They don't have to share anything. And if you go around insulting them, I mean, yeah, that's just common sense. Let's just pray and hope for the families that they will have justice soon and charges will be filed. I believe it's Chadwell. If you disagree, we can agree to disagree. That's all I have for tonight, folks. I hope you have a safe week, safe life. Let's pray for justice. Thank you. Have a good night.